This is Dirshu Mishnah Brura Simin Reish Mem Dalid as we continue with Sif Gimel. Says the Mechaber and Banu Einam Yehudim Li Yisrael Bayis B'Shabbos B'Isser. Based on the aforementioned Sifim, it's clear that Goyim cannot build a house for a Yid on Shabbos. Let's say they do. B'Isser. It is appropriate to be stringent to do what? Shalo yikansu boy, not to use the house. Says the Ramah, however, let's say the Yid said, don't work on Shabbos. Ben Yehudi asab al karcha, and the guy did not listen. Lemar lahashem lachtoi. He wanted to quickly finish. He wanted to get paid. Then, ein lachash. Only come on, simin tovkov memkim. So on one hand, you should not enter the house, but on the other hand, in a scenario that the Yid did what he was supposed to and the guy did not listen, then you could, yes, use the house. Says the Mishnah Brura, Sivkotin Yotas Ve'eser. Hainu Shaya B'ki Bailas U'B'toichat Chom. It was Kablanus, but it was B'toichat Chom. To Aser Rak Mishamar Esayin. Then the Isser is not an Isser Be'etzem. It's an Isser Marasayin, what it looks like. The Be'em is that I didn't have Sheyavid because he worked on his own. Canal. Let's say it was a real Isser. The guy was being paid by day, the Medina Asr. Then Yishua Isser Mitzad Adin B'Diavad V'Loina Choin Belvad. It's not just proper not to go in. Kein Gaza Magin Avrav V'Chebucha Gam Dein Das Bach L'Nitz Chayoyim V'Yos Chayodim Chayoyim Asr Medina B'Nin Zad Shumil Sed Perhesia. For him, lo'olam. Forever it is usher if you hire a guy, a worker, a schir to work on Shabbos, there creates an isser in the item. Lo'olam. Ula'achirim, how long is it usher? B'chtei sheyasu. B'chtei sheyasu is the amount of time that it would take to get this item. If by working on Shabbos, the house was finished a week earlier, so others, achirim, after a week's time, would yes be allowed to go into the house. Says the Mishnah Barav Yishmei Kilim, there are Kilim, that even in this scenario where it's a schir yoim, that it's not aser medina, but rather only it's only us or the amount of time that it would take to get this intended hana. And the Kawan Shechais, if you dal Sham Mishnah Brura. Nachan the Hachmer Simchat and Chaf says the Mishnah Brura Bachreinim calls it to be Avdi Yeshach with Kabbalah and Asadas of Inutam Motul Adra Afilu La'atzman. Says the Mishnah Brura that really Achreinim hold once it is done, if it's Kabbalah, you're allowed to be maker like a Inutam, and you're allowed to live there Mutul Adra by even himself. If Cohen was cutting stones with tikkun hakayres, it might have kablanos. You're allowed to utilize these materials. What is the chumra? Forever. And you allowed to benefit and sell to a guy. So then the Machaber continued. The Ramah continued, excuse me. What happens if you told him not to do it and he did it anyways? He didn't listen. On the Tanai that you did prior, he did not listen. Don't worry. Says Mishnah Brura, if you did yours, you told the guy, do not work, and he does, you do not need to be moicha, says Mishnah Brura. Come on. And similarly, this is seen in Muchach Bebir Hagra. Continues the Mishnah Brura on the first wide line. Ayin in the Magen Avraham Shemefakveg Ma'oid Bedinza. Magen Avraham is very concerned about this halacha. The Kivan Shuma Chobar says Magen Avraham 1 second. We've been learning that any time an item is attached to the ground, there's a stigma, and it's much more chamor. So says Magen Avraham, Binyan Abayis is certainly connected to the ground. We have to worry. They're not going to know that you told the guy not to work on Shabbos. Ein lahakel bazeh, says Mishtabura. Rather, Ella, what should you do? You should, yes, protest the guy you should work and stop him from working. So Mr. Brewer's basking, you told him not to do it. And he did it anyways. What should you do? You should be moichem. Said the Mishnah Berurah, Kiva shebekach istam b'tzchila v'nir tzalekach. Since he made a tenai and he agreed to v'nir tzalekach, and the guy seemingly acquiesced, you don't have to mikamaka nirat. You don't have to pay him to stop. Ad kan devarav adel yirabah. Mashmal l'shayne. What do we see from adel yirabah? Tim lo yistam mitzchila. Let's say you didn't make a stipulation. Ein dai b'machal bilvad. If you didn't stipulate, don't work, then it's not enough just to tell him to stop. You'd have to even spend money. Why? Because you were negligent. You should have made such a stipulation. Ledina concludes the Mishnah Berurah. Tzarich Ian, what is the precise halacha in this case? Continues the Mechaber Sif Dalid. Says the Mechaber, Meleches b'farhesia. Meleches farhesia, afilu b'metaltalin. Even metaltalin kigoin. Svina yadua li Yisrael. A boat is not attached to the ground. But if it's yadua that it belongs to dina kamay meleches mechaber, because the work is done in public, it gets the din of meleches mechaber. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkatan Chaf Gimel. Hayodua li Yisrael. Ein mari sheisa b'rshus Yisrael. We're not talking about that it was made in the possession of the Yid. Tiachi. Because if it was in the possession of the Yid, then stam metaltlin is gam kinas convulsion base of bases we'll get to. Dam metaltlin aser ma'isay sabershus Yisrael. Elamayri shalai bebeisai. We're talking about that it's not in his house, but it's meleches for esya. You're working on a boat, the public eye sees it. Ayin magen Avraham misharachani the davka ma'isas asfina b'makam galo yumerforsam. Teim bitzina ein lahachmir ba. Because if it's bitzina, then it's metaltal bitzina, which we'll see in Rishon and Beis Sif Gimel, the status of that. And we begin Sif Hey, says the Mechaber. If you hired a guy for a year or two, a long-term arrangement to write or to weave for the Yid, then he's allowed to weave, he's allowed to write on Shabbos. So this is a big chiddush over here, that even though it is time-bound, but because it's such extensive time, it gets a din ki'ilu, a k'tzitza for the item. And that is, you don't calculate it daily. That's the Shita Rishayna to be Mekel. And then there are those who are Machmir. So we're going to stop over here and let's see the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah Sivkatan Chavdal Shichtav Loi Kasavam Magen Avram says the Mishnah Berurah. Kavanas Rambam Kider Chasarim. Like Minister Sheishem Sefer Miyuchad, or Chayat Miyuchad, their personal tailor, the personal scribe. Whenever he wants to write, the guy has to write for him. And if not, he just does nothing. And that's why we have to realize how extreme this example is. This could be comparable at some level, maybe to a living maid who's obligated to work at all times. But that's the reason. Why? Because he does whatever he wants. He didn't tell him to do it on Shabbos. If he wanted to do it tomorrow, would the Yid gain or lose? No. Aval, however, says Mishnah Baram Schar Leir Gloi Tamid B'Shana Zu. If you hired him to weave constantly in this year, Lichtav Loi Tamid, to write from constantly. Aser Aflav Rambam Lichtav Loi B'Shabbos. It's forbidden even according to the Rambam to write from a Shabbos. Av she'ina midaktik alav al bitul izeh yoim. Even according to the Rambam, you're not allowed on Shabbos, even though you're not medaktik on the fact that if he did or did not work on that particular day, he's not going to lose something. Still, it's aser. Mikol makam when marviach yisobat siyasa, you're gaining. Ume'etaz masha gam b'chayam nechashav la'Rambam kablanis. The taz masha, this would be allowed. Because he's not makbid if he's mevatel. Dimu makbid love shalish easy and batel, then it would for sure be aser. Because then it's like you told us to do it on Shabbos. The kuli amad avikilusi valasas be on my Shabbos. Oid kasavatad dimschar ligmay sefer. If you hired him to complete a sefer, I beg it to man or a garment within a requisite amount of time. Then kim makbid. It's like you're makbid. I know that's when a very important line. Biyadua that what shei efshar ligmarim lo yasek gam Shabbos. That's only if you gave him a short time window that he has to work on Shabbos. And here's the next very important line. Let's say he stayed up all night, he can finish. If you told him to do lahedi on Shabbos, kain be'er regarding kavanos of iskim neged al yarab. This is what the Machaber should have said, and we'll stop with that. So very important klalim here at the end, that when he's telling him that he has to work, or that the situation is such that he has to work or else he won't be finished, then it's going to be a problem. So let's look at the deer shoes over here, starting with note number 19. Says the Yershu, talking about the first case that we learned today about a house that's built in Shabbos. Says the Elif L'Chashleima Kluger, even though it's only part of the house, it's aser. Why? Because it's a kenas, like all malachas that was done on Shabbos, and therefore there's no such thing as bittul, no such thing as roif. Therefore, if part of it is built in Shabbos, it's the same halacha. Adds on Shleima Kluger, this is the intent of the Shulchan Aruch, because it's not Yitachah that the whole house was built in one day. It means part of it was built, but it still would be aser. Let's say one has Yidden working for him. Says Moshe Feinstein, is also should be an Isser Hana. Even though we're going to see in Shinichas, Ma'aseh Shabbos done by a Yid, one does not have to wait the requisite B'chdei Sheyasu, and rather it's mutter right away after Shabbos. It's more lenient if done by a Yid than done by a Goy, but still, says Ramosha Yitachet, it's mistaver, it makes sense. Do it should be machmer building al Yidei Yisrael, like it's building al Yidei Goy. Therefore, it'll also be aser b'chdei sheyaseh sesarchin ledina. This was a big shiloh, the train in Eretz Yisrael, which parts of it were built on the Shabbos by Yidden. On the other hand, comes on the Rav Vosner Shevet Levi, and he writes that the Isser Hana for something that is done for Esya is only when something was done by a guy. Ach b'nasai de Yisrael, says Rav Vosner, it's more mekel. But Lamaisa, he wanted to be machmir, because it says Rav Vosner Mor Melechal Shabbos instead of a guy. However, we are seeing that there is room for a kula. And note number 20 talks about a guy that digs a kever on Shabbos for a yid. It says in Shulchan Aruch, a different yid is allowed to be buried there. And the Magen Avraham explains that is dafka if the guy dug it by himself and the yid did not command him to do it. But if you command him to do it, then it's going to be usher entirely. And then we spoke about Dirshana number 21, going in the Mishnah Berurah Chav Beis, whether you have to spend the money to stop the guy from working. And Mishnah Berurah concluded that you have to if you did not stipulate straight up front. What about the wages? Says the Kaf Chaim. There was an usher. Shapiz men arrived a lot of money in order to Leniach Legai Limnos. He wanted a guy to build for him a house at Shabbos. And there's a terrible fire in the city, and the fire reached to near this guy's this is house, excuse me, and Hafach Hashem Yisarach is a Revach v'nitzel b'beisai. V'haisiv Shem zeh schar b'alam hazeh. So wow, this is the schar he's getting in this world. How much more so is he going to get in the next one? Now let's say someone hires a Jewish contractor and he says to him, you should only build during the week and not on Shabbos. And he's over, and he hires a Goyim to work for him on Shabbos. Says Ram Moshe, in such a scenario, since there is a loss, and the Baal Bayis said over Lifnei Iver, why? Because you told him not to work on Shabbos, therefore you'd be allowed to utilize that area on Shabbos. However, one should wait the Chlei Sheyasu amount of time. And finally, what was the reason? No, number 22, because 23, he didn't tell him to do it. Nachri, a secretary. You have a Goyish, a secretary that does everything, says even if you didn't tell him to do it on Shabbos, it's still aser, because it says if you told him to do it on Shabbos. We'll stop over here. We'll pick it up from the end of Sif Hey in the next year of Siyata Dishmayu.